Hello. Welcome to the 19th episode of the Veggies Abroad Vegan Travel Podcast with the chief veggie pusher, myself, Rebecca Gade Sawicki. Some of you may already be familiar with Veggies Abroad, but for those of you who aren't, we're a full-service vegan travel company that offers custom planning services, small group trips, a helpful blog chock full of just about everything a vegan or veg-curious traveler could possibly need, and also this podcast. With this podcast, I hope to bring you guys the inside scoop of what vegan-friendly, and eco-friendly businesses are doing in the wide world of travel. Plus, I'll give you the full download of what's going on behind the scenes at Veggies Abroad. So if you're on the newsletter or social media, you've read the good news that I've announced some of our 2025 tours. I know that I have been teasing them for a while. One, it's because I can't afford in many ways to let you forget about them. And two, putting these together takes a metric ton of effort and always includes roadblocks that I can't foresee. I can have things coming along super nicely and then a hotel decides to stop communicating, or the rates come back incredibly high, so I've got to go back to the drawing board. At some point, I should try and put together a behind the scenes video of doing these. I imagine many of you would be really surprised at the amount of effort that it takes and probably surprised that I haven't given up yet. But I really hope you're also pleased that I didn't give up either. But at any rate, for next year, we have a tour of Tuscany in April that includes a stay at a vegan agriturismo, which is really kind of the feature of this trip. Then in May, we have a vegan ring road tour through Iceland. And at the end of the year, our Thailand tour is making a comeback with a few really amazing enhancements. I'm really excited about going back to Thailand, but I'm also really excited about our enhancements. It's possible that you might see one more trip pop up. So if you haven't joined the newsletter, you better do it right this instant, or maybe after you stop listening to this. There's one last point about all of these trips that I want to make. While each trip will offer unique activities, vegan food, and accommodations, one thing will remain constant. Every journey is planned as responsibly and ethically as possible. This means ensuring that more of your dollar stays in the destination. Locals share their stories and insights. Our environmental footprint is minimized, and wildlife is treated with respect. To achieve this, I've partnered with two powerhouses in the travel space, Intrepid Travel and the World Animal Protection Organization. With Intrepid support, the carbon footprint of every traveler's land-based itinerary is offset, and locals are involved in every stage of the itinerary, from inception to execution. Meanwhile, the World Animal Protection Organization ensures that both of our organizations adhere to strict ethical animal welfare and wildlife policies. You can find my wildlife policy and what I will promote and support and what I won't on my website homepage. This actually flows really nicely into today's conversation about responsible and sustainable tourism. Our ability to travel freely and reach distant corners of the globe has become incredibly easy and accessible. Ages ago, a trip abroad required a ton of research and maybe even the assistance from a travel expert before you felt even a little bit confident that it could become reality. But today, with a few simple clicks, you could be eating pad thai in Thailand or kayaking the Amalfi Coast tomorrow. While there's a lot that's really fabulous about that, it also comes with many unintended problems. The number of cities pushing back against the rise of tourism grows daily. Not only does it affect the quality of life of locals, but the impact of having millions of people in one area day after day comes with countless environmental problems. I think tourism has the ability to be such an impactful and inspirational force, but it can be incredibly destructive. And it's critical that not only businesses and governments enact change, but we all as travelers must reevaluate how we're visiting and traveling to many of these places. On the most simple level, this means being conscious about how your presence will impact where you're traveling. And if you're unsure about how to really consider that, book with companies who are actively talking about sustainability, who share how they're supporting the local community and protecting the environment. I also encourage you to skip using Airbnb and other rental platforms, as these have caused massive housing shortages in many cities. Also, this shouldn't come as a surprise, skip cruising. I have a whole podcast episode episode dedicated to this. Please listen to it if you haven't already. A few other ideas: shop and eat locally, skip major chains, hire local guides or book locally run activities, travel on the off or shoulder season if possible. There is so much more to this conversation, and to help me bring some expertise to it, I am thrilled to have the co-founder of one of my favorite travel partners join me. A backpacker with a vision, Darrell co-founded Intrepid with his mate, Jeff Manchester, in 1989. Their vision was simple: to offer a new style of low-impact travel that connected travelers with communities. Today, Darrell is regarded as one of travel's most influential leaders, and he plays an instrumental role in advancing the industry's sustainability agenda through his activism and philanthropy, and also serves as chair of the Intrepid Foundation. He is best known, however, for the tall guy with a big laugh. With that, let's get over to my conversation with Darrell. Hi, Darrell. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Rebecca. Great to be here.
It's good to see you again, even though you're dealing with some unpleasant winter weather down there in Australia.
Yes, I just got back from 3 months in the Northern Hemisphere and, spring and into early summer, and it's been beautiful. And you get back here in Melbourne and it's kind of dark and kind of grey and kind of wet and kind of cold. So not the best. But anyway, hey, that's what we all have in seasons, huh?
Yeah, right. It's the blessing and the curse, I guess, of seasons, right?
Yeah, that's right. It is
you
a
get to
blessing
see something
too.
different.
Yeah, totally.
Well, to kind of kick this off and our focus on responsible travel, let's kind of start from the very beginning. What prompted you to want to start Intrepid back in the late 80s?
Yes, that's a long time ago.
It's not that long.
I think there's kind of two reasons, if I'm honest. One is that I don't think I was a very good employee before then. So.
Oh, that's a really good reason. I like that one.
I did a commerce degree at university, and with a very good friend, and he'll come back into the story later. And then went travelling for about 3 months immediately after the degree, like a graduation present to myself, if you like. Got back, got a job for 2 years, and I kept mucking up. I've never been terribly good on figures, and I was a marketing graduate role, the manager put up with me for 2 years, but in the end I just said, "Hey, listen, I'm not cut out for this." And he said, "I'm glad you said that." "No, you're not really."
Oh my gosh.
And I said, "I'm off travelling," and I went backpacking through Asia for a year. After that, I got back and got another job, which I was probably marginally better at, but still didn't feel a natural affinity with traditional employment kind of basis, and went travelling for another year, this time through Africa. But I took a whole group of friends through, and we bought an overland truck and fitted it out and shipped it over to the UK to start the adventure. And then that guy who had been in university with me, he came along as one of the punters, and so we just on the trip. I just very recently got married at that time, like as in a few months earlier, and Anna, my wife, came on board as well. And so the three of us kind of fell into a series of conversations about how work can kind of suck a lot of the time, and then also how travel is great and we really like travel, and well, maybe we could start a travel business. And it kind of went from there, really.
Was it always under the premise? So I guess in the very beginning, it came from your love of travel.
It did.
Did you always kind of have I want to connect with the community aspect of it? I want to connect with the culture aspect of it?
Yes, we did have that. We didn't have what we would now call sustainability aspect. We certainly, a part of the philosophy, if you like, of that we were talking about in Africa was how the travel industry, the traditional travel industry, didn't seem to do what we like to do, and that is travel very much at a grassroots level, meeting local people, understanding the culture, really coming away from a destination or a country, having really felt like you've lived in it and explored it and started to understand it. Only started to understand because you might be there for a few weeks or whatever.
Right.
But nonetheless, you get a better insight in it, and you've tasted real food. You've learned a little bit about the religion, a bit about the history.
Sure. Met
real people, had real conversations, and all that stuff. And we just thought, well, why is it that on the surface of it, the travel industry, the big players don't do what we do? And So we kind of formulated a bit of a philosophy and it wasn't a business plan, but an idea of how we might go about it. And we got back and had a chat to a few people who knew a little bit about travel, and they said, well, almost universally said, well, no one's done this. And we kind of thought, well, either that means it's a pretty lousy idea and we'll go broke very quickly, or maybe it's a decent idea and we won't go broke and we'll survive. And fortunately for us, the latter was the case.
That is always a really fun place to be in when you're like, well, this could be a really great idea or it could be a really sucky idea, but let's find out.
You just don't know till you give it a go, do you? So
yeah, you truly don't.
Back to your question about kind of sustainability, I think we relatively quickly, like within the first year or two or three, remember this is all happening 35 years ago, we had a couple of our early staff and even Manch, my business partner, he was based in Southeast Asia where we started. I was based here back in Melbourne because we were about to have kids. And what the feedback from our leaders on the ground, our group leaders actually running the trip, was that, we're going through these wonderful areas. We've really, and meeting fantastic communities who are extraordinarily generous with us and with our clients. We really need to kind of reflect on that and think, well, how can we, one, ensure that the destinations are preserved in a way, not in a patronising way, but in a way that, the great cultural things that we're enjoying also are preserved for future generations. And really we almost highlight and value what they do. I remember one night we were staying in a really very remote hill tribe village in northern Thailand, and we'd been there for a few times before, and the local village head was saying to us, oh, look, we really love you coming through. It's really great. What can we do for your travellers? We've been thinking about it. We think we can get a Coke machine here. And, we're saying to them, no. We don't need Coke machines. You can go anywhere in Thailand in big cities and have a Coke machine in this beautiful little remote village. Last thing on earth we want to see is a Coke machine.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And it was those kind of conversations that just really started to make us think, well, what does respect look like? How do we give back to the community whilst not turning them into a clone of ourselves, if you like,
Yeah, absolutely. Because so many destinations, that's a really interesting point to say, a clone of yourselves, because that's what's happening kind of around the world. And some of these places that used to be kind of hidden or not as well traveled, and you can kind of find the same things that you find in your own home in each of these places.
That's right. And we've got to be careful in the same time, though, because these local communities, they're not a zoo. They're not there for our pleasure, that we go and, pay to visit and keep them as they are. That's not the way it should be. Everyone has the human right to develop in the way that they see fit. So it's just that balancing point of working out, how can we add value here? How can we respect the local people and have conversations that lead to mutually beneficial outcomes, if you like. So that was kind of a long way of saying that we fairly early on we started to build that ethos of preserving, respecting and building interlocal communities. And I guess that's just going on. It just perhaps looks a bit more sophisticated than it did in those days.
No, I think that's a super interesting point, and we'll definitely circle back to that, because I think there's a fine line with all of it, especially when you involve people in the situation, and it can very easily go from being very responsible and respectable to the opposite. So
that's
back when you started, was the concept of responsible or sustainable tourism even a thing?
No, definitely not. No, it just wasn't an issue. And maybe it was in academic circles at universities, I'm not sure.
Sure.
But certainly it's not a thing you heard about at a public level, or certainly in travel agents or travel industry bodies. No. Although having said that, I'd always been very influenced by Lonely Planet, the guidebook publisher, because, if I'm heading off to Asia for 6 months or whatever, Lonely Planet would be my Bible, if you like. And Lonely Planet never talked about responsible tourism per se, but they certainly did talk about the ethos of being a respectful traveller. And so that was part of probably our foundational thinking, where they were coming from. And as it turned out, we got to know the folk at Lonely Planet really quite well, and it was great sharing of ideas and so forth.
Ah, that's very cool. You guys probably had some similar growth at the same time
Yeah,
during all
they're
of those
probably
years.
yeah, they're probably 10 or 15 years ahead of us.
Yeah.
So they were already a big company, in fact, when we started. And actually, I'll let you know a little secret, which
I love
not many people know
secrets.
this. But when we started, we're Melbourne based, as they're saying, and Lonely Planet at the time were also Melbourne based. And in fact, their office was only about 200 metres from where I was living when I got back from Africa. So
Oh my
I
gosh.
literally walked down to the road and knocked on their door and said, "Hey, is Tony Wheeler, who was the founder, is he in the office?" And he was, and so he opened the door, didn't open the door. He found in the office, and we had a chat. And I said, "Hey, look, we'd really like to call this company that we've got in our minds Lonely Planet Adventures. What do you think about that?" And I said, we're really traveling on a kind of Lonely Planet philosophy or principles, very grassroots, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And we're just, we're glorified backpackers when it all boils down, what we're planning. And he thought about it for a week or so, and in the end just decided, no, it wasn't for them because Lonely Planet gives independent advice, if you like, to travellers.
Sure.
And he said, as soon as we're a tour operator, we're kind of crossing some kind of invisible line and we're a bit conflicted. And kind of thought, yeah, that's fair enough. So we didn't push it too hard. But yeah, it was an interesting conversation, and we've stayed kind of loose friends ever since, actually.
Oh my gosh. I wonder what he thought then as watching you guys grow, if he felt like that was the right decision to make, or man, I missed out on a major opportunity.
I think they did okay without us,
Yeah, I mean, they did. They're massive.
Yeah.
One thing we didn't do from the get go, I think is probably helpful for listeners, is if you could kind of define what you think responsible or sustainable tourism is.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question, and not actually interesting to give an easy answer. I think it depends on where you're going, what you're doing, what the context of your travel is. So I often say to people, if they want to think about responsible tourism, start with the Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 goals there, and each of those really trigger a question that how is my activities going to impact on the world? And so if you're a dive company, then the goal about under the water is incredibly relevant for you. As a company that travels all around the world, climate change is incredibly relevant for us, for instance. So I think sustainability can mean different things to different people. But I think if you look at it in two broad buckets, one is kind of people focused and one is environment focused. And I think it's really critical that you look at both of those buckets when you start to address sustainability for your organisation or for your personal travel plans, for that matter.
And would you say being a responsible travel would be more on the person individually?
No, I think it's on all of us. Yes, as individual travellers, we definitely have choices to make about how we're going to travel. Absolutely, for sure.
Sure.
Like anything in life, we're responsible for our actions. But by the same token, a company is really just a bunch of individuals, and a company will make choices as well. And so it's very dependent on companies as well to decide and make conscious decisions around where their impact is going to land. Any company will have impact, and it can be positive or negative. So what do you want it to be, guys? And you really need to think that through. And ditto, governments and tourist authorities and whatnot are also very relevant to the issue around what does sustainability look like and how can we regulate for sustainability. Sometimes, particularly in where you're from, in America, there's this kind of almost laissez-faire, hey, let's go for it, do whatever we want to do, personal rights kind of attitude, and the primacy of the individual is above everything else. Personally, I don't quite agree with that. I think we've got responsibilities that go beyond us as individuals. And that's one of the responsibilities for government, to say, let's institute laws or standards around things that are important. And environmental preservation and human rights and so forth, they're all issues that I think transcend the individual. And so therefore, the government has a really important role to play as well.
That's a very interesting point. And I see that a lot with travelers too, that, especially here in the US, that people don't get a ton of time off. And so when they take that time off, it's kind of like, I'm throwing out every care in the world. And I always tell people, look, you scour ingredients labels, you look up companies when you're buying new clothes or when you're buying almonds, for heaven's sakes. You have to do that same thing when you're booking a trip. It can't just be, I just finally got a weekend off, so I'm going to do whatever I want to do. I mean, within reason, but be respectful and responsible about it.
That's right. And, I think a lot of people think, but it's a holiday. I don't want to put that effort in, and I get that. At the end of the day, it is a holiday. But nonetheless, there's a set of decisions within that holiday that you're going to make anyway. You're going to make decisions on price or location or how many days or, various other issues. We'll just put sustainability in as one of those decisions that you need to make it when you assess what to do, what you're going to do for your holiday.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have maybe some top things or examples of what you think about, what comes to mind when, being a more responsible traveler that people could keep in mind in the back of their planning?
Yeah, look, in a planning, there's kind of two areas, I think. One is kind of before you go, in terms of, that planning phase, and so issues there come into things like, well, how am I going to get to the destination? So that means transport. So that means what are the carbon emissions from that transport? Whether it's driving or whether it's flying or whatever, there's impact there that you need to start to think about. When I get to the destination, where am I going to stay? How am I going to engage local people? You need to start thinking about that. And then, more particularly once you're on the ground in the destination, how am I going to behave? What does good behaviour look like? Whether that's what I eat or whether it's how I interact with people or get around or whatever. So, look, there's a whole series of things that, when it all boils down, aren't rocket science. I don't think I'm going to say anything that's necessarily new or thought-provoking. It's more just to factor in that decision-making process and be mindful of whatever it is that you're doing. And, that's like so many things in life, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And then on the company side of it, or on the business side of it, are there things that Intrepid then considers for all of its trips, like a kind of a tick list of things that make your trips more sustainable or responsible?
Yeah, there is. And so to a certain extent, as the tour operator, one of the reasons a tour operator exists is because we make it easy for people, as in,
You sure
hey,
do.
I want to go to Peru for 2 weeks. I can book, 10 different hotels and work out transport links and blah, 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 and find out what I want to do, where I want to go, et cetera, et cetera. Or I can book a trip with Intrepid, and so you, in a way, the traveller is delegating a lot of that responsibility to the tour operator. And so therefore, as a tour operator, we've got a heightened level of responsibility to take on all that thinking on behalf of the traveller. And so we, in fact, we've got now a whole department, like it's 6 people that purely look at the sustainability of what we do and the impact of what we do. And so, that's everything from where you're staying and what power supply they're doing through to how we'll get to places, how we get around to places, what is and is not culturally sensitive, how we train our staff on issues, how we softly educate our travellers on issues. Going back to that point earlier, that a person is booking a holiday. They don't want to be preached to. They don't want to be bashed around the head. You must do this. You must do that. Yeah. Flip side, a person, 99% of people are very, very happy to learn as they go and recognise that, you're going to a different culture a lot of the time. By definition, people will do things differently in those countries. So what do I need to know in order not to offend people? And it's, it's just a avoidance of ignorance almost, isn't it? Where,
Absolutely.
I just come back from Japan. There's lots of do's and don'ts in Japan that are quite unique to Japan that are very different from, you in America or me in Australia. And so how do you just learn those subtly and carefully, and that will actually lead to a better relationship with the local people, and then you'll have a more rewarding holiday. So it's rather than being a negative, it turns it into a positive.
Yeah, absolutely. So these things, like, they seem like a no-brainer to me as, a traveler, as someone that works in the travel industry, but this isn't kind of the standard operating procedure for most companies within the industry. Why do you think that is?
Yeah,
I
look,
might
it's
have
a
just
really
given
good
you the
question.
million-dollar question too.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you notice how I just paused then because I
I
don't have an answer on this?
know.
Look, to me, it's absolutely a no-brainer. Like,
Yeah.
we started 35 years ago. Our first year, we took 47 travelers. It wasn't exactly a roaring success. The next year, we took 150. It still wasn't, but gradually, we grew.
Yeah.
This year, I think we're taking 400,000 people or
Oh
something
my
like that.
gosh.
So it's grown a lot, and yet it's grown organically. And a lot of people in the industry say to me, "Oh, you do so much on carbon management, or you do so much on gender equality, or you do so much on whatever. We're only little, or that costs a lot of money. We can't afford to do that." And my answer is more along the lines of, well, actually, I'm not sure you can afford not to do it, because
Yeah.
when we were a little company, we were growing quickly, and we were investing, for what are better words, in these types of issues around
Mhm.
sustainability, and it worked really well for us. And it worked really well for us because our clients got a better trip, and they really got educated, and they thought, wow, this Intrepid company, they're doing things well, and I've learned something, and I've had fun, and met lots of interesting people, and really got engaged with the destination. So there's kind of a big tick, if you like, from the clients.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, our staff are saying, oh, this company's doing things, and they actually really care about me as a staff member. They care about the destination. They're not just a profit hungry corporate entity. And so big tick from staff. And so, and ditto, our supply chain was often also, the hoteliers, transport companies, just local communities and villages and things. The relationship with all of those was really good too. And so I think those stakeholders have really helped build our growth. It's
Yeah.
not because I'm any genius or anything, that's for sure. So, when companies say to me, oh, we can't afford to be carbon neutral, or we can't afford to take these policies on, or we can't afford to have a responsible tourism department or whatever, I'm just saying, well, yeah, you probably can't afford to grow either then, because you're
Yeah.
not going to grow if you're not forward thinking and actually looking hard at what you're doing and where your impact is and how you can be a better company. And to a certain extent, don't you want to be better? Don't we all as individuals
Right.
want to be better than we were yesterday? It's not necessarily be better than the guy down the street or the company across the road, but it's just, I think, even just as a employee myself, I want to work for an organization, and I myself want to do better work than I did last year. It's just kind of natural. So, and as a traveler, you want to have a better holiday than you had last year. So all of this is just almost kind of development stuff, I think, really.
Yeah, right. And it also makes me think too, like, are you not looking at the landscape in which you're operating? Are you not looking at the problems that some of these places are facing? Do you not want to
100%.
be, part of the resolution and helping the people that live there? Or are you just wanting to, tear it apart and then move on to the next? It's kind of
And that's it. And
disheartening.
so, you look at the word sustainability. Sustainability isn't what you do now. Sustainability is thinking about the future and ensuring that that destination or whatever it is sustainable for the
Yeah,
future, so that it's
right.
much as it is now, if you like. So they're the actions you need to take. And as an industry, this is why I sometimes get a little bit narky about the travel industry, because as an industry, don't we want to invest in our own industry so that we've got a future as an industry?
Right.
The travel industry is growing quickly, which probably doesn't surprise anyone.
Hmm.
It grows at about 4% every year. And you think, well, okay, that's fine. That means we've all got secure jobs in that sense. But if we start wrecking destinations, then all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, gradually it's probably going to start growing less than 4% a year,
Hmm.
because people are going to go to places and they say, oh, gee, that wasn't so good, or I'd heard about this was so wonderful and fantastic and magical. Actually, it's not. And that word is going to start spreading. And in
Yeah.
fact, it's going to become a bit of a negative feedback loop. And so that, you risk killing the goose that laid the golden egg almost.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an excellent point, and it really makes me wonder what kind of the future holds within the industry, and if more places will be proactive with it or do something.
It is frustrating. Until about 6 months ago, I was vice chair of the World Travel and Tourism Council,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's about the 200 biggest travel companies in the world. And I'm not actually sure how Intrepid got in the room because we're not one of the 200 biggest travel. I don't think we are anyway. But anyway, ended up becoming vice chair and specifically to encourage better sustainability practices within the industry and create framework around sustainability. And I have to say I was really quite disappointed with the industry that there's not that foresight there, either for each individual firm or the industry as a collective, to say, hey, let's create a series of standards that are uniform. And if you want to be a member of this organisation, then you have to sign up to this. And it doesn't have to be too draconian, but it does. A rising tide lifts all boats, and
Yes.
and I think the large players in the industry should be taking a lead. And I've got to be careful because some certainly are. There's some very good companies out there, particularly the large hoteliers who I think probably are the best of the lot. They really take sustainability. The Hiltons and IHGs of the world, they take sustainability very seriously. But others in the industry definitely do not. And in fact, if anything, actively undermine the initiatives of those who do take leadership because they've got this very old-fashioned idea that they just see the costs, they don't see the benefits.
Yeah, that is really sad. And I've been told that too in some conversations. So, in my role, I get a ton of emails every day of places that want me to sell their business, that want me to bring travelers to them. And, I kind of have a set framework of questions I ask some of these people. And some of them, when they kind of look at me, like a deer in the headlights, I'm thinking, how have you not thought of some of these questions before? I cannot possibly be the first one to ask you about your initiatives and what you're doing in the community.
But
terrible.
But it's great. Keep asking those questions, please. And every listener here should also be asking questions,
Yes.
And I think it's one of the biggest instigators of change is that we as customers can ask questions of suppliers or others or whatever, and that gets people thinking. So, it's really, way back when we were talking about earlier, 30 years ago or more, when our staff started asking us questions, how are we going to preserve these destinations? How are we going to respect these people? How are we going to help in disadvantaged communities? It was only those questions that led to us really becoming much, much more thoughtful. So I think when customers ask questions, it's a really good thing. So keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell people, if you feel a little bit shy, leave it on a comment card, send an email, but don't ever doubt the power of your voice, because that's the only reason why people change or places change, businesses change. Otherwise, they have no incentive.
You think of the vegan and vegetarian food issue, for instance.
Yeah.
You go back 20, 30 years ago, vegetarians were starting to become a little bit more vocal and really asking questions and so forth. Mm-hmm. And over time, that really changed. Now, perhaps, 10 years ago, it started similarly with vegans. And now, particularly in Western countries, let's call, it's almost mainstream now. Yeah. And that's because people were asking questions. And you don't have to be vocal. You don't have to be demanding or obnoxious or anything like that. Right. Just ask questions, do you have, can you help me, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
It goes a long way.
Hey there, fantastic listeners. Let's hit pause on this episode for a thrilling announcement, a golden ticket to Globetrot with Veggies Abroad. Veggies Abroad isn't just your go-to for vegan guides and trip planning tips. It's your passport to extraordinary small group journeys, carefully crafted by the ultimate veggie pusher and your favorite podcast host, me, Rebecca Gade Sawicki. I've spent countless hours researching the best vegan hotels, food, and experiences, and now I'm bringing those experiences directly to you. Join me and my newfound veggie pals on escapades to exciting and exotic destinations around the world. Whether it's trekking through the Thai jungle to witness elephants in their natural habitat or staying at a carbon-neutral camp in Kenya during the Great Migration, our adventures are nothing short of spectacular. And guess what? Those aren't the only exciting trips awaiting you. So what are you waiting for? Cruise on over to veggiesabroad.com pronto. Well, how about after this episode is over to explore our dazzling lineup of 2024 trips and secure your spot on your next vegan adventure today. Yeah, you have to plant the seed, and you're 100% right. 10 years ago, the landscape in the industry, as far as food is concerned, was much different. Product selection was much different. And so, I really hope that, it goes the same way within the travel space with
Absolutely.
being more conscious, being more careful with all the things we want to see for years and years to come.
And it's learning, isn't it? I know perhaps only 5 years ago, I was really still at the stage personally about kind of thinking, I don't really understand the whole vegan thing. I don't quite get it. And yet my own personal education's changed dramatically since then. Maybe it was 10 years ago, but and so now I'm not vegan, but I do eat plant-based food far more than I was then. And I have oat milk and so forth,
awesome.
All the time. So but little steps like that along the journey, because you start to think about it because it's in the public domain and people are asking questions and then you just starts behavior change, doesn't it?
Oh my gosh, yes. It's like a snowball. It just kind of picks up speed and more and more and more.
And that's why I think sustainability is, 30 years ago, no one in the industry was talking about it at all. Mm-hmm. And then perhaps 15 years ago it became, a little bit more talked about, and there's a bit more specialisation and discussion and some practice changes. In the last 5 years, whilst it's nowhere near what it has to be, nonetheless, at least it's a topic in conferences. Companies are starting to talk about it. The B Corp movement, which presumably you know a little bit about.
Yes.
The B Corp movement is getting bigger and bigger and bigger in travel. Now, that in itself is a very conscious, mindful kind of movement that really makes companies investigate the hard questions often about where their practices are and are not, and really drive change via an audit trail so everything can be tested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I just read recently that there's a bit of a, not delay, but maybe a waiting list with the B Corp certification, because so many places are trying to go through the process and they can only handle so much.
Yeah, it's been a problem for 5 or 6 years because the B Lab, which is the governing authority that kind of gives the ticks, if you like, it is an exhaustive process, and they don't charge as much as what it costs to do the process.
Wow.
Which kind of is nice, but in a way what it means is that there's this backlog constantly, and because it is expensive, because it is thorough. And so, yes, now I think there's something like a couple of thousand companies in the pipeline waiting. Now, the good news is that they're accrediting more companies than ever. So, I think it's something like doubled in size in the last 3 years, something like that. So
that's really
they've really
great.
got their skates on, and they're attracting some more philanthropic dollars just to increase their resource level so that they can process more. But and it's a lovely problem to have for society. I mean, I think it's just it's sensational that it's where impact lands, and particularly when big companies adopt B Corp principles and have to really work through supply chains on very difficult, hard issues, and again, by definition, all these B Corp companies or aspiring B Corp companies have to ask the questions that we were just talking about.
Yes, absolutely.
Go into labour rights in the supply chain. Go into carbon emissions, go into all sorts of issues, customer issues, staff issues, healthcare, all sorts of different things, and it just it's that rising tide issue.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a really great thing to have that many companies on the waiting list, because that means there's that many more places that are really being more conscious about these efforts, and
it's working too. I was talking to someone the other day, I can't remember who, sorry about that, and we were just commenting about how much faster B Corps are growing than normal companies. And And I wasn't really surprised, but it's nice to see. So, because a B Corp has to really invest in things. It's, you don't just get a tick because you pay them a check. It's not easy. And so it does cost money to get accredited, just by proving things, lifting your standards, et cetera, et cetera. But the public and staff are really reinforcing the process. And it just seems like it's really good for everyone, which is fantastic.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I agree. So for travelers listening, who might be wanting to see really popular things maybe this summer or into the fall, how do you recommend people kind of balance going to some really popular destinations, popular sites that are struggling maybe with over-tourism issues, with being responsible? Is it kind of the case of maybe some of these places we don't need to see, or maybe we see lookalikes of them, or do we go a different time? What do you think?
Look, there is seasonality is a good answer, but because if you can go on shoulder season rather than peak season, then you'll almost certainly have a better experience. So that's a good answer. But sometimes people just are locked into a certain month of the year when they've got to take holidays and they don't have that choice. So then again, I'd kind of almost be going back to that issue. Well, think about it and just be a little bit more mindful of it. And yes, Barcelona, for argument's sake, has always been on your bucket list and you want to go to Barcelona. But think, if I go to Barcelona and I'm one of a million other tourists or whatever in town, what's the quality of the experience going to be like? And maybe there's other places in Spain or somewhere else that would be actually just as good or maybe even better, that are more genuine, more authentic, and also my presence would be more welcome, because, wherever you're going in on holiday, you're spending money. Actually, let's talk about Spain. Spain's a bit of a passion project for me.
Oh, really? Excellent.
Well, just to the degree that in the last dozen years, I've probably been to Spain 8-9 times for extended holidays, and I'm a very keen walker, and I've done quite a few walking trips. Started with the Camino, which travels northern Spain, but done other walks in Spain as well. And it's frustrating in Spain because you go to the Barcelonas and it's so packed.
It is.
In my mind, just not very enjoyable because it's just, wall-to-wall tourists, and you just, the locals don't want to see you, don't want to know about you really, and I don't blame them at all.
Right.
You go to 98% of Spain, there's no tourism there. You have wonderful local experiences, brilliant food, fantastic architecture, and it's just joyful. And you kind of think, well, it's really not hard to have a sensational experience in 300 kilometres or 200 miles from Barcelona.
Right.
It just takes a little bit of a lateral thing. And you won't see the icons of Barcelona, possibly, but you will see amazing architecture and you will see all sorts of other things. So, for me, it's kind of a no-brainer. I tend to go where others don't go, but maybe I'm just a bit weird.
No, I think that is a good thing to plant within people, because I think so many people, and some of it I blame social media for. You get caught up in this like FOMO.
Social media has made it worse, for sure.
That people think, well, my neighbor went, my best friend went, and I'm going to miss out. And I don't know how many people I've talked to, and I've even experienced this too personally, where you finally make it to this place where you think is going to be just the most wonderful place in the entire world, and it's going to be so beautiful. And you get there and you're like, oh man, there's a million people here. It is super loud. Everyone's mad, and it's not a great experience. And so I think people have to break out of stop paying attention to what social media tells you where you need to go, and start making decisions that are impacted more on the kind of experience that you want to have.
The kind of experience you want, and the benefit you can have. That I'm still a big rap on the dollars we spend at tourism. It can be life changing to local communities, and maybe not so much in Spain, but in more developing countries, when we're spending money, you are literally lifting people out of poverty,
right.
And you're giving them new skills and new jobs. And so there's an incredibly positive impact. In fact, it's one of those double-edged swords we have on sustainability,
Sure.
the benefits of tourism versus the costs. And, if I take a long-haul flight to go to Africa, for argument's sake, huge carbon emissions, and some people argue it now, kind of rightly, that it's just really, really bad for the environment and we just shouldn't be getting in planes. And there is an argument for that if you're purely looking at the climate issue. However, there is more to life than climate. That's the biggest single issue we're probably facing, but there is still more to the world than climate. And right now you've got, millions of people in Africa still living in poverty. Well, I just had a month in Africa, actually, and, when you're travelling in remote communities, you're spending quite a lot of money, and that money is going into local communities, and it is providing for education, it is providing for housing and shelter, and it's providing for healthcare. And so it really is assisting people enormously. And you kind of think, well, okay, there is definitely a negative on tourism, but there's definitely a positive as well. And so we're just got to be a little bit careful when we talk about sustainability and climate, that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yes, that is a really excellent point for sure. And, I had this, experience kind of recently, it was in Africa as well too, where, I had an experience within a local community, and the community was very impoverished, and you feel very compelled to spend money, to give money, but then you start thinking, well, this is kind of a band-aid, the dollars that I'm giving, that we really need governmental change. We need systemic change to really pull these people up for, to be sustainable within the future. And, I'm curious if you're seeing kind of governments making this shift to really invest within their people, because travel is very accessible now. People can go to the most remote regions of the world and see some of these things and quickly post about it.
Yeah, totally.
So I'm curious if you've seen kind of a progress with that on a governmental level.
Yes, and from multi-development agencies as well. So yes, there is definitely progress, but probably not the progress we need.
Yeah.
And if you look back over the last 30 years, East Asia has developed massively. Countries like China are absolutely transformed. India is kind of well on the way. A lot of Africa is still well behind. I've had two quite long trips to Africa in the last 12 months, actually, and both trips where my wife and I have been reflecting on when we went through 38 years ago, whatever it was, on that trip that saw the foundation of Intrepid, because we had 8 months there then, and what we kind of reflected on is that the key cities in Africa, the Nairobis, Kigalis, Kampalas, etc., they're all massively different. They're quite developed. You've got glass shiny towers and modern telecommunications and street lights and et cetera, and lots of people in office jobs. So they look, quasi-Western, dare I say it. But you go 20 kilometres out of town and it looks remarkably similar to what it did 35 years ago. And so the development just hasn't reached rural Africa really at all yet. And to the degree that, you still see a lot of mud houses, quite some thatched, not even iron roofs, kids walking 5 kilometres to school each day, and really a lot of that hasn't changed at all. And, I think it's easy for us to say, well, look, governments should have done more, but we do have to remember that the governments don't have a taxation base to draw on, because you can't get tax from, a subsistence rural family. So therefore you can't build a school or a decent healthcare centre or whatever it is. So it's not quite as simple as, governments. There's more to it. Aid can help, but so can industry and industrial policy. So I've been quite thoughtful of it lately, and there is no silver bullet answer. But again, maybe I'm blinkered, but I do think tourism does help, because tourism can go to relatively remote areas. It can, by doing so, employ people and build infrastructure and build meaningful jobs and educate people. And one of the nice things about tourism is the the barriers to entry are really low. Like you think if you want to build a, I don't know, an electronics company, you need electrical engineers and blah, blah, blah. Well, you can't just do that in rural Africa.
Right.
But you can start a lodge because you can train people how to make beds, how to cook food, et cetera, et cetera. So those barriers to entry are very simple. And so if we as a company and the industry generally can go to places that are beautiful and preserved and have fantastic sites and maybe national parks, et cetera, the client will have a wonderful experience. Local communities will have jobs, and really not just jobs, but good paying jobs.
Yeah.
And kind of everyone wins. So it's a great thing.
Yeah, that's an excellent point for sure. And there are so many people too that I've talked to on my travels who have, shared how it has affected their community, having people come in and their family and personally. And I mean, that's like right. Amazing.
Yeah, and I kind of concentrated on the financial flow a little bit, or skills flow. But the other kind of interesting thing is the human flow, which is kind of what you're touching on there. Yeah. And that's two-way. It's not just me as a visitor, what do I get? But when you have a conversation, a real conversation with a local person in a destination, they're getting something too. And there's this interchange between the two people. I'm learning something, they're learning something. And I don't know who it was, but someone once made a quip that, you never go to war with a friend. And there is something in that, isn't it? And if we all travel a little bit more and build understanding and, realise that, I don't know, an Islamic person, for argument's sake, has a different faith than what I have, but actually underneath that faith, they're also caring about their kids, they're worried about their future job, they're got all very human issues and human concerns, just like I have. And so, by having those conversations, you build bridges between people, between cultures, between faiths, between skin colours, between everything. Whatever, and you start to build respect and understanding between people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if more people had the opportunity to travel, this world would be a different place, because it would break down so many barriers, and people would realize, oh, you're really not that much different than me at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I'll even put that in the context of the US. You've got a pretty fraught election coming up, and
sadly,
the political paradigm in the US is pretty awful. I spent a fair bit of time in the States, so I'm reasonably familiar. But I'd almost argue that people in the States should travel more within the States, and with an open mind. And if you're a Democrat, have a good chat to a few Republicans and just see what they're thinking, and try to keep an open mind, or vice versa. If you're a Republican, just what is it about these liberals? Why are they coming from where they're coming? Have real conversations and try to understand each other, and just break down the barriers. And it won't necessarily fundamentally change what you think, but being open-minded is never a bad thing. And it almost goes back to that, conversation about asking suppliers about sustainability, or asking a restaurant about vegan options, or whatever it is. It's that two-way conversation. It's just a learning experience for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. It all boils down to respect, and then you have a deeper respect.
All boils down to respect,
right?
Totally right.
And I think so. My last point I kind of want to touch on, with kind of the culture and the human aspect of connecting with people on your travels, with visiting communities. There is kind of a fine line with doing that before it becomes disrespectful in a way, and maybe not. And you're meaning to be disrespectful. Maybe a good term is like it turning into a bit of a human safari, if you will. Yeah. And how, I guess, if you have kind of an opinion of where is that line, how can travelers kind of differentiate with, I am helping these people versus I might be creating another problem?
Yeah. And look, it's a great question, and I don't think there is a line in terms of where you cross it and where you don't. All things being equal, the more remote a community is, and more fragile it is, the more careful you have to be.
Yeah.
So me as an individual traveller who goes to New York, my impact will be minimal.
Right.
But me as an individual traveller to a hill tribe village in northern Thailand, in time could be significant. So I think it's more a case of that. And so, I think as individual travellers, we probably won't often be going overstepping that line, I don't think. I think we think as a company, we've got to be very mindful of it.
Sure.
Because we go to some areas and, just by virtue of the fact that we go there, we might be going on a particular itinerary every week, or in some cases more than every week, in which case, when is our impact positive and really beneficial, and when does it cross that line to say, you know what, we're really starting to get a little bit jaded here and it's not really constructive. And it's something we are really mindful of. We actually did a study on this years ago, like probably 25 years ago. It got a PhD student to look at load carrying capacity in remote communities, and it wasn't decisive either, but it certainly got us thinking about what the issues are in terms of how you kind of start to monitor and what you do about it, and splitting itineraries and so forth, which we've followed through on. But it's just that mindfulness area. We've just got to be careful of it. I don't think you should jump to conclusions and just say, oh, look, this is wrong, because it's never as simple as that. It's always very nuanced. The devil's in the details,
Yeah, that is a really excellent point. One thing that somebody brought up to me recently was, consider, would you do this in your home? And it was specifically kind of around the issue of kids. I think maybe I had it brought up once, but I had someone reach out to me and was like, hey, we have this amazing school with these amazing students, and we think you should bring your travelers here. And I was, no, issues of kids, no, I wouldn't interrupt someone's school day anywhere else in the world. Why is it okay for me to interrupt the school day somewhere else?
Absolutely. And so that friend or colleague, it's good advice. And, schools is just a no-no. You shouldn't. And it's very patronizing. It's very disruptive. Yes. It's just not appropriate. And they're kids, and ditto things like photography. There is lines on photography of what you can do and can't do, and what you shouldn't take. And, that's where, there is guidelines that you can pick up relatively quickly on that as a traveller.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is that thoughtfulness, isn't it? It's just being thoughtful and mindful about what you're doing. Not being paranoid, but just making decisions that you've considered.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked a lot about people, but wildlife also kind of falls within, the realm of being responsible and a more sustainable traveler. Are there red flags that you kind of see that travelers could look out for when maybe an activity isn't great?
Yeah, there are some simple do's and don'ts, like in terms of buying products, like shells or, animal products, ivory or something like that. But I think most people have a reasonable level of understanding on that now. It's a bit like the, photography or whatever. There's fairly clear guidelines of what you can and can't do. I think very often on the wildlife now, it's there's positive impact, by going to certain places, it will value wildlife being alive. And so in Africa, actually, one of the shining lights of development is through tourism and the growth of national parks. And not only the growth of national parks, but the sustainability of those parks, because, an elephant or a rhino or whatever is worth more alive than they are dead now. And so, so communities are really starting to take on a anti-poaching aspect, because half the community is guides or work in lodges or whatever, and so they've got a vested interest in wildlife preservation. And that's an incredibly positive outcome that's really started to get a lot of momentum over the last 10 years or so, and I think should be more. One of the South Africa is a country that's gone through, well, lots of pain, but the last few years, lots of trouble. One of the amazing shining lights, one of the few shining lights really in South Africa at the moment is the growth of national parks. And Kruger National Park, which is the biggest single national park in Africa, now is transformed into this thing they call Greater Kruger National Park. And Greater Kruger National Park is twice the size of the original park, But the greater part is all private landholders that stock and preserve land and knock their fences down into the park after the authorities have said it's okay to do so. And so what we're seeing is this almost positive cancer that's taking over kind of Western South Africa, and it's just getting bigger and bigger and more species and better preserved wildlife. And it's just, and it's totally happened through tourism. So, tourism can be of benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I always tell people too, some red flags for me is like, riding elephants, touching wildlife. Like you should always, go respectfully, watch, or maybe engage with your camera, but not with your hands.
Yeah, that's right. And look, I'd like to think that most of that is kind of fairly
straightforward.
Understood now. But It was interesting. I was in Galapagos a few years ago, which obviously has a wildlife paradise.
Yeah.
And, there's lots of very sound rules of things you should and should not do in the Galapagos. And yet I saw a person literally touching a seal, and we had clear instructions not to do that, and doing the selfie thing. Yes. And you think, no, come on, please, don't do that.
Yes.
And when they were confronted with the issue that they have been told and shouldn't do it, they just said, oh, it's so cute, I just wanted a photo, and you think, oh, come on, please.
Right. You wouldn't say that if it had bit you. Then you would have been really pissed, and this would have been a different
And I shouldn't
discussion.
Say, but you almost wish it did.
I know. Yes. That had gone through my mind as well too. And actually with South Africa, I was recently there as well too, and visited Boulder Beach. And obviously there are lots of rules. Don't touch the penguins. They're endangered. You watch, you're quiet, be respectful, yada, da, da, da. And then there are also signs that say, seriously, they bite. And so one of the people I was with had to yell at someone who was trying to feed them. And one, don't feed them. They don't need to eat Doritos. And two, I kind of wish that would have just bit you, because maybe it would have taught you a lesson.
Yeah, it's like there's a kind of a hierarchy of incentive, isn't there? Like, it's like, I don't know, wearing a seatbelt. You wear a seatbelt because you might get fined, or you wear a seatbelt because you might die, you know? Or drink driving, or, it's a bit like what our approach to wildlife. Why is it that you're not going to do this? Because you're going to be told off and humiliated, or because you might get bitten, or because it's just ethical that you don't.
Yeah, because it's just wrong. At the end of the day, it is just wrong. So
that's it.
As you look ahead kind of in the future of sustainability within the travel space, are there trends that you think that you might see, or things that you're really hopeful for to happen?
What I'm hopeful for is just that the travelling public becomes more and more aware, asks those questions, and then in turn the industry really starts to just take it on board as a hygiene factor. Like if you think the travel industry, any given company has a really solid accounting system because they need to know where all the money is. And so you've got accounting standards and you've got systems and everything works as a result. Well, sustainability should be in the same kind of category, that it's just something a company does because without it, everything goes haywire and you need to get it right. You need to have systems, you need to have verification, you need to have controls in there. And this is what we do. And that hasn't happened yet for most companies. But more companies are getting better. I don't want to be too negative, definitely. Like what we were talking before about the B Corp movement. It's definitely on the way, but it's got a long way to go. And it's critical. And, we haven't talked much about climate change, but the reality is on climate, holidays are nasty. The travel and tourism industry accounts for about 10% of global GDP. It's more than that in carbon emissions. Now, the really bad thing about that is that the industry is still growing, whereas a lot of carbon emissions, you think more and more cars are being EV now. More and more power supply comes from renewable sources. So a lot of emissions are falling in a lot of sectors, but in the travel industry, actually, they're still growing. So it's quite conceivable that in, 5 to 10 years, travel and tourism industry could be 20% of global carbon emissions, in which case we're going to become a pariah industry. We're going to become, the smoking of the 2030s or something. So it's a really worrying thing. And I just... I think our industry has to take climate change far more seriously, and every company or every traveller has to take their own personal emissions far, far more seriously, because if we don't, we're simply not going to have an industry. It goes back to that sustainability thing. Why do you go to other places to experience wonderful things? Well, in 20 years' time, it's quite conceivable that a lot of the key destinations that you want to travel to are going to be underwater. London, New York, Shanghai, Bangkok, all of those are very, very close to sea level. And so sea level rises a metre, they're underwater. Snow seasons, well, there will be no snow season. The beaches that you're going to stay on, they'll be underwater. So, there's lots of reasons for us to have a personal interest of why we want to manage climate change, quite apart from just the pure ethics of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a really great point. And I hope that in some of the trends that we see is, more sustainable jet fuel, airlines taking a look more at their waste, and, hotels and places being more conscious of their entire processes. That's kind of really what I, hope to see in the coming years for sure. But again, it's going to go back to people demanding it.
It is. And then also it's good for us to support the people who are really putting effort in. Like I just did a shout out before to Hilton, who I think do a good job on sustainability. United Airlines, in your case, is the, I think, and I know a fair bit about this space, probably the most advanced in tackling climate change and sustainable aviation fuels, etc., in the North American market. And so, vote with your wallet to a degree and support those who are doing the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it always comes back to. Right back to my point about those damn almonds and looking at companies when you're buying clothes or whatever. You have to do the same thing when it comes to travel, as, kind of annoying and frustrating it is. But I think that the state of our planet depends on it for sure.
Yeah, it's annoying and frustrating. But on the other hand, it kind of also brings a certain level of personal satisfaction, doesn't it? When you make a choice and it's the right choice, generally you feel quite good about it. And so I think actually it's a rewarding thing to do rather than a painful thing to do.
That's a great way to look at it. I think also too it affects your experience, because when I've done that, for travel experiences, they've always been so much richer, so much better, so much more engaging.
Absolutely.
As opposed to the others that were like, here's your itinerary, you're going to do the same thing that 8,000 other people have done before you. There's no deviation.
Yeah. That's right. And, you think you travel. Why do we travel? We travel because we're curious about other places, don't we? So if you've got that curiosity, let it run. There's no better time than when you travel to let your curiosity run. What is around the next corner? What is inside that building? What would that food be like? What would that person be like to talk to? Go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that point, I think that is a great place to leave it. And I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for coming on to chat.
Thanks, Rebecca. Great being here. Great chat.
Yes, and good to see you again, as always.
Terrific.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. If you did, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. If you'd also like to learn more about upcoming Veggies Abroad tours or get additional travel help, visit veggiesabroad.com and also join our newsletter. It's the best way to stay up to date with loads of new content, like where to find gorgeous vegan hotels, what to eat in cities around the world, trip planning tips, and so much more. Well, that's all I've got for now. Until next time.